University, and I'd like to start by giving you some samples. 'Cause I've learned that a good way to build some goodwill is by feeding people early. If it's in the afternoon, I serve maple alcohol, but since it's in the morning, I'm going to pass around something a little more nutritious and friendly to all age groups.
2 spoons.
And I'm going to talk about this in more detail later, but we do a lot of new product development with maple syrup in the Cornell Maple program.
How many spoons each?
So take 2 spoons each, sorry, take 2 spoons. I have 2 different things to pass around. So one of the products we've been working on is a hazelnut spread. So if you're familiar with Nutella, chocolate, that's basically a chocolate hazelnut spread. We've made a maple hazelnut spread instead. So the main sugar is maple sugar. We're actually growing hazelnuts in our sugar bush as well. This isn't made from the hazelnuts that we grow, but that's something that we're going to try to do in the future. But the 2 samples I have to pass around, one is what we're calling our original formula, our first formulation of this product. And the second one is we came up with a formula that boosted the maple flavor a little bit for people who like a little more sugar, just to show the difference in the sugar content. So please just go ahead and pass these around. No double dipping, right? The usual house rules. And see what you think. And we can pass the spoons around again if you want to try it again, just to get a better sense of how it tastes. So I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about the work we're doing with new products and confections at Cornell. Can we go ahead and advance the slide? If you're not familiar with the Cornell Maple program, what's that?
Could you talk a little bit louder?
Sure. I'll stand this way and project my voice so you can see a little better. So at Cornell University, we have a maple research program that's devoted to applied research and extension, so education to sustainably grow the maple industry, right? So maple is a topic of huge interest across the Northeast. It is also a topic of interest in New York, where our Department of Ag and Markets and our governor's office have been very interested in supporting the growth of the maple agribusiness sector. So we have a lot of new funding and new resources for this work in New York, including, we've got 2 maple labs now. You can go to the next slide, please. So some of you, if you're from the Northeast, up in this area of the country, might be familiar with our Eline Maple Research Forest in Lake Placid, New York. It's been there for a long time. Some of the first vacuum releasers were created at the Eline Research Station. One of the first reverse osmosis experiments was done there with an old nuclear submarine reverse osmosis membrane. It was like 40 feet long. And they managed to get the sap up to 4% with it. They had to build a whole building to house the thing.
Interesting.
We've got a 250-acre research sugar bush there. We do a lot of birch and beech syrup there. So we produce birch syrup commercially and sell it there. And we've been experimenting a lot with beech syrup. And if you've never had beech syrup, you collect it the same way you would maple syrup, same time of the year. You can tap little tiny beech trees because they have beech bark disease. They're dying anyway. And we use microspiles to tap the little 3-inch ones, because they have a big root network, so they can actually produce a lot of sap. Usually it's around 0.8 sugar content, sometimes up to 1%, so there's a little more work that goes into processing it. But it makes a really nice, like, raisiny, dried plum type flavored syrup. It's really nice. Very different from maple syrup. So we've got a lot of things going on there, and we're very busy testing out automation technology there as well. So we have an automated RO, and we're trying to add other automation so that we can learn about it and teach maple producers how to use it effectively. Next slide. So that lab is run by my colleague Adam Wild. My facility is outside of Ithaca in Van Etten, New York, which is just south of Ithaca, New York, which is right smack dab in the middle of the state, just south of the Finger Lakes. We're within Cornell's 4,300-acre research forest, the Arnott Forest, and within that we have a 350-acre sugar bush. We have the potential to grow it much larger, obviously, within that 4,000 acres. And we've tapped as many as 8,000 trees. We've shrunk it down for the past few years to focus on other things, but we're probably going to grow this into a 10 to 15,000 tap sugar bush sometime in the near future. This is where we have our maple lab, so we're doing a lot of tests. So we have 2 rigs. We actually have 2 fairly new liter steam away rigs that we're testing things on right now. We have a pretty big vacuum pump system. One of the neatest features of our, oh, I put it in here twice, I'm so excited about it. We have a new product development lab within our facility. So we just built a new 4,000 square foot building, and we added that research kitchen there to give us some capacity to do some different types of research. And so one of the things that I found was a deficiency in just the maple world in general, and I've been making maple syrup since I was a kid in the 70s, is that we just don't have food science expertise. You know, a lot of us that do it, like I'm a forester by training, and a lot of the people that I work with in research are foresters or plant physiologists or they're agriculturalists in some other way, but not food scientists. So recently we tried to address that deficiency by hiring a food scientist. So this is Dr. Belisle, who works for us now. She's been with us for going on 4 years. And the first thing we did after we hired her is threw her out in the woods. She tapped trees, she's repaired lines, she's run the evaporator, the reverse osmosis machine. She's gone to the fairs with me and taste tested syrup. And we just immersed her in the maple syrup world. So she is a maple food scientist now. She knows what maple syrup should taste like, what maple sugar should look like, and all that. And for the past 3 years, she's been doing a lot of really great work and adding some resources that we sorely needed and some knowledge we really needed in the maple world. So what I'm presenting today is more the results of her work. I wanted to introduce you to some of the projects she's been working on. And, you know, full disclosure, I am not a food scientist. I'm a chainsaw scientist. I'm a forester. So I'll answer any questions you have the best I can, but if I can't answer your questions, I can put you in touch with her. And one of her responsibilities is to answer questions for everyone. Cornell likes to brag that they're the land-grant university for the world. So even though we're in Vermont, we'll or wherever you're from, we're happy to help with your issues. One of the first things we had Catherine work on was revising our confections notebook. Has anyone ever seen the Cornell confections notebook? Right, so it's a great resource. So my former colleague who's now retired, Steve Childs, looked at all the traditional maple confections, sugar, cream, candy, and tried to identify what were the issues that people were having batch failures around. And so he came up with a really meticulous approach to testing your invert sugars, your sugar composition, really nailing down the finishing temperature based on the conditions of the day or the sugar content of the syrup, and created some really scientific guidelines so that you could create good quality confections every time. And there were a lot of other confections in that notebook too, maple sodas, ice cream, things like that, ready-to-eat marshmallows. But in the first pass of that notebook, there were some things that needed to be fixed or revised. And we had 5 revisions before this, but we still needed some things to be really improved. So Catherine went through and really upped our game for this notebook. So now we've got the 6th edition out there, which is substantially changed from all the previous editions. And it's got a much better format. So if you have this notebook and you've been using it, one of the past editions, I really strongly recommend that you check out this new version. It's much better, and there's new information in it as well.
How do you get it?
Next slide, though.
How do you get the notebook?
Next slide.
Next slide.
How do you get the notebook? It's available for free. We used to print this out and sell it. We've stopped doing that. It's just because we don't have the capacity to do that in-house. But you're welcome to go download it. You go to cornellmaple.com, that's our website. Look for you click on the resources tab, and there's the CMP notebook series. And it's available as a PDF. And I downloaded it right onto my tablet, so it's right there, and I can scroll through it and write on it and everything. Yeah, you can put it on your phone.
Yep.
It's a little bit hard to navigate on a really small mobile device, but it's all right there if you're able to download it to your device. Okay, next slide. So another thing we tackled right off the bat was a lot of people have kind of some common problems making some traditional maple confections, batch failures with cream and sugar in particular. So if you're interested in that, if you've been making cream or sugar, or if you're interested in making them, you might want to check out these fact sheets that we put out. These aren't the only ones. These are just a couple of examples of fact sheets we have for troubleshooting with confections. These are also available at cornellmaple.com. If you go to the next slide, please. So the types of things you're looking at are like grainy cream, right? Or too thick or too thin, or separation. Does anyone ever have their cream separate?
Oh, yeah.
Right, I mean, that's a really common problem. And there are ways around that. There are ways to make shelf-stable maple cream that you don't have to refrigerate as well. And then in sugar, right, getting the invert sugar level right, getting the moisture content right, all the usual struggles for getting that sugar just right so it creeps when you pile it up, it doesn't clump in the bag and things like that. All those things are addressed in these fact sheets. Next slide, please. Oh, I didn't put where to find those. Oh, I think I have another slide about that. Oh, another thing that we have is, and this is really interesting, I think, is a new way to extend the shelf life of maple candy. Are there any maple candy producers out here today? Okay, a few. So, does anyone crystal coat their candy? So, we've got a couple crystal coaters. It's a cumbersome process for some, or at least a lot of people find it cumbersome. So, crystal coating, you soak your candies in a super saturated sucrose solution, kind of like making rock candy, and you get basically a crystal coating of rock candy on your sugar or your candy. Really thin layer, it kind of sparkles in the sun like diamonds, right? But it takes a long time. You have to soak it for a long time. There's a lot of dabbing of the extra moisture, and you don't always get a full seal on the candy and still get white spots. So we basically adapted a method that's commonly used in the candy industry. It's called panning, and it's a series of quick soaks and dries to create a coating of sugar that seals the candy and preserves it longer, but it's simpler and faster. So basically, if you can picture one of those French fry baskets, it's a wire basket, you can just pile the candies in there and dip them in the solution. Just dip it for a moment and let it come out and dry, and then dip it again. And you just do a series of dips, and you can have your candy coated within a day. And the difference is that it doesn't have the shine so much. It's more of a matte coating. It's more a flat coating, which some people like, some people don't. But it seems to preserve the candy much better. And it's interesting because it creates a little crispy shell on the candy. So if you make really soft candies, sometimes soft candies can get banged up a little bit. It gives them like a little armor layer. It has a nice mouthfeel when you kind of bite through that crunchy outside, and then it melts in your mouth on the inside. So it depends on what you're trying to accomplish with your candy, what type of candy you want to put out there. But if you're interested in a simpler method, that fact sheet is out there. It kind of walks you through all the steps for that.
How many times do you dip in that?
I have to look at the fact sheet, to be honest. I think you can dip it as many times as you want if you want a thicker coating, but as far as minimum, I don't really remember. I think it was at least 3 or 4 dips. Yeah. So, and you're talking an hour dry time for each one, or thereabouts. But if you want to look at all the details yourself instead of listening to me make stuff up, you go to our website, go to Learn Maple by Topic, on confections, on that tab, this fact sheet's available, and it's quite detailed. Next slide, please. So those are some of the resources we have for traditional confections, but really our bigger focus right now is new product development, right? There's so many new sugar makers coming into the world. You can't walk 10 feet in Vermont without getting hit upside the head with a jug of syrup, right? So we need to come up with new things to do with maple syrup. And that's kind of a fun task because maple syrup and sap are really versatile, right? They have sugars, they have good flavors, they can be used in a wide variety of ways. But when you get into more advanced food products, there are different concerns, things that related to food safety, for example, or food chemistry, things that are sometimes a little hard to understand or research that we can't really tackle with the resources we have in our own sugar houses. So we're trying to do some of the background work that requires more resources and putting that out there in the public domain so that people with smaller sugaring operations can pick up where we left off and kind of make their own products with us having done kind of the hard work at the beginning. What you're seeing here is one of our labs up at Cornell. This is the Cornell Food Venture Center. So one of the resources we have, which is really great, is one of the best food labs in the world at Cornell, and it's designed for new product development. It's this giant warehouse. It's about the size of Walmart. I mean, this is just a picture of one small corner of it, and everything's on wheels.
Oh yeah.
And so you can rent out the lab, tell them what you're trying to make, and they can wheel together the commercial scale equipment you would want to use for that, and you can do a product run. You can actually make products and just see how it would work. You can rent out their space to produce things or just to test the setup. So it's pretty advanced. It's a really great resource. So we've been doing a lot of this work through our food scientist, and the products that we've come up with finalized guidance for, we publish that guidance in the form of fact sheets and other links on our website. If you go to cornellmaple.com again and go to our new product development tab, you'll see a list of all the products that we've completed work on. And that's a slowly but steadily increasing amount of resources there. Next slide, please. Just as a point of kind of interest, I think, is we always think about maple as a food product, but we've actually been venturing into the bath and skincare products world. And I know this isn't original, other people have done this, but we wanted to make sure there are some really good base recipes out there so that people knew the best ways to use maple sugar and sap in these types of products. And there are a lot of regulations around cosmetics that are very different from food regulations. So we wanted to have that guidance out there as well. One thing that we've already finished the guidance for is this maple lip balm, and it's not hard to make. It's not hard to buy these little tubes and buy little molds to make all this stuff. We've been producing it, a lot of samples, and we already have some maple producers in Western New York that are making our formula, and it sells pretty well. You go to those craft shows and people come to your booth, they want to buy some maple syrup, but they see something totally different that's not even a food. They're likely to buy it. It's small, it's not super expensive, but you can make a good amount of money on it according to our cost analysis. So that's something you might want to check out. We're also working on some other stuff, sugar scrubs, bath bombs. I don't try this stuff out myself. I think I'm kind of beyond hope in the beauty category, but other people might want to try it out. So a lot of stuff coming really soon in that category. Another thing we've been focused on is marshmallows.
Yeah.
Maple marshmallows are great. It's just a really good flavor combination. And we had a ready-to-eat marshmallow recipe in our confections notebook for a long time, but it was something that you could mix it up and eat it immediately. We didn't have a shelf-stable formula. So we've come up with a good shelf-stable formula for gourmet marshmallows. If you go online and search for gourmet marshmallows, you wouldn't believe what people pay for a little bag of homemade marshmallows.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. A little bag of marshmallows, $9. And it's not hard to make marshmallows. But to make really good gourmet marshmallows, there are some extra steps involved and some specialized ingredients. For example, gelatin, right? We all have used gelatin probably. You go to the store, you buy the little box of gelatin from Knox. Well, that's not the type of gelatin you really want to use for make a good marshmallow. Gelatin comes in different rankings or ratings for the tensile strength that it creates in your product, and it's rated by the system they use is like platinum, gold, silver, or something like that. And platinum has really strong tensile strength, so if you want to make something that's really chewy, you would use that. These use silver rated, what was it? Gelatin, sorry. The word escaped me for a moment. Silver rated gelatin to get just the right mouthfeel. And our formula is also shelf stable. So if you want to make marshmallows that are good on the shelf for a month or more, we have the formula there. So we've got that recipe with great detail. We also created a marshmallow spread. So, marshmallow fluff is a product that is commonly sold next to the peanut butter on the shelves at the stores. So the marshmallow fluff is meant to be a gourmet version of that. It competes in that space. We gave out samples of this at the end of the school year out of the main quad at Cornell University where the students are wandering around. And I've never sampled out a product that was so well received in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there were professors walking away with marshmallow like all over their face, just a big smile on their face. Everybody loved it. This does have egg in it, so it does have some hazardous ingredients. That's considered a hazardous ingredient because some people are allergic to eggs. So a little more care is needed for this. All these are things that would require a 20C kitchen license in New York State. There are similar requirements in a lot of other states, so you'd have to get a license to produce these, most likely, but it's not difficult to get. Our little surprise product that we really liked that came out of this was we took some of our gourmet marshmallows and we threw them in the dehydrator. Because we've been fooling around with making a hot maple cocoa, but there's no chocolate in it, so it's like, we call it a maple steamer, or hot maple beverage. We haven't come up with a good name yet, 'cause you can tell. But we wanted to make some maple marshmallows to put in our mix. And so we dehydrated some, and they were really delicious. You know, the little marshmallows that are in Lucky Charms or something like that. They're nice and they're crunchy, but it concentrates the flavor. And then we decided to make some powdered maple sugar, and we rolled them in that, and it really intensified the maple flavor. So we've actually started producing these as samples, and some people are working on making them to sell. Just little bags of marshmallow crunchies. So really good. We've got fact sheets for all of these on the website. Next slide. And here's what you're trying. You guys came in late. Do you want to try a sample? This is our hazelnut spread, kind of like Nutella. I'll pass it over. Everybody's had samples before you came in. Make sure everybody gets one. If you can, sorry, pass the spoons. Thank you. So what did folks think of that? Any comments, any feedback on the hazelnut spread? Everybody got a chance to try it?
This second one is much better.
Yeah,
with the more
I
maple
agree,
flavor.
yeah.
You like the more maple
Oh,
flavor?
yeah,
I did.
definitely.
Yeah.
More maple, yeah.
Did anybody like the lower maple flavor, the original one better? You did? Okay. One. It's interesting because when we sample it to maple producers, they're always like, where's the maple flavor?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
you want a lot of sweetness.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, when we actually sampled it out with the general public,
Yeah.
they tend to prefer the one that's less sweet.
Really?
So that's one of those things where this type of research really helps because what we like in the sugar house as maple addicts isn't what normal people like always. So just a couple different options for you there.
Interesting.
Yeah, so this one isn't, the fact sheet for this one hasn't been published yet. We were waiting for one last piece of information. Sometime within the next few weeks, this will be on our website. We also have a chocolate version, so I didn't bring that today. So a chocolate hazelnut spread, chocolate maple hazelnut spread.
Yeah.
The maple flavor doesn't really come through in
Yeah.
the chocolate version. So that's one of those products where the value of maple is simply the fact that it's in there and you can advertise that and you can put some in and raise the price.
Yeah.
Because people will pay a premium for
Yeah.
natural sugar
Right.
of maple. And it does add a little complexity to the flavor. Like if you tried it side by side with Nutella, you would say this is different.
Yeah.
But when you taste it on its own, you wouldn't say, oh, this is a maple product. And that's one of the, I think, the hidden values of maple is that it adds complexity to flavors sometimes when it doesn't shine through as just maple flavor. When we make things as maple producers, oftentimes we're like, we want to make a maple confection and it has to taste like maple. Our maple beer needs to be like maple pancake beer or something. But you can make really good beer with maple that doesn't taste just like maple. It's not always the best flavor to have in the front. Sometimes it's a good flavor to have kind of in the flavor profile, a little more subtly. So, lots of different options with hazelnuts. And hazelnuts are a big thing now. Hazelnuts are grown in Oregon now in large quantities. They have big orchards out there in the Willamette Valley. Because traditionally hazelnuts are mostly grown in Turkey and places like that. But the U.S. industry is growing fast. Starting with that Oregon industry and now on the East Coast, there are a lot of hazelnut producers coming online. It's a great nut. We have a native hazelnut. It's nutritious. It's got a lot of flavor. You can make oil. You can make meal, flour, lots of different things out of it. So we found that we can grow it in our sugar bush in an area that we thinned out the sugar bush. For part of a thinning experiment, there was enough sunlight coming to the forest floor that we planted some rows of hazelnuts, and they grew great. We haven't had any nuts yet, so they're not mature, but every year they grow like a foot. So it's pretty interesting. Next slide. Another area we've done a lot of work in is beverages. Right? Beverages are a great place to make a lot of money. People are always buying beverages when they're out and about in the world. There are a lot of different types of beverages out there, a lot of different categories, and we've been kind of experimenting in all those, ranging from sodas to functional beverages like kombucha and sports drinks to alcoholic beverages, wine, beer, and distilled spirits. Right, and where do we use maple in beverages? We've been looking at it as a flavor additive, right? It has really nice flavor, mostly as a syrup, in syrup form. Maple sap, not so much for the flavor. It's a great fermentation substrate, right? You can ferment maple sugars pretty easily. Yeast like to ferment glucose. Maple syrup's mostly sucrose, but they're good at converting sucrose into fructose and glucose, and then fermenting the glucose quite adeptly. It's a good carbohydrate source, so if you're looking for a sports drink, put maple sugar in there instead of high fructose corn syrup. Seems like a better way to do it, right? It's got some nutrients. Some people are interested in it just as a natural water source. Like there's a company up near Buffalo, New York, Hazarazi Water. They're actually taking just the permeate
Yeah.
and they're bottling it and making a fortune.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell,
Yeah,
right?
it's
Most people want to dump that stuff.
Yeah.
The leftover, they take it, they put it in a bottle, put a little carbonation in it, sell it for $3 a bottle. So, natural water source, and that's the only way you can get organic water right now that I know of. So it can be certified organic water. You can't do that any other way. So that's another advantage of it. There's a lot of marketing value. Maple has a lot of cachet in the marketplace. And in New York at least, we have some special licenses, farm processing licenses. We have a farm brewery and a farm winery license. They're a little, the advantage of those is it's a little easier to get those licenses than a traditional winery license or brewery license. But the catch is you have to use all ingredients sourced from New York State to get these special licenses. So they're going out looking for sugars.
Oh.
There are a lot of good adjunct sugars that are produced in New York State. So the breweries are clamoring for maple syrup, so they get their brewery license. And wineries too. Has anyone heard of spotted lanternfly?
Yeah.
So spotted lanternfly, right? It's an invasive species that was introduced to the U.S. People were worried about maple for a while. Looks like it's not really going to go in the sugar bush,
Really?
but boy, it loves grapevines. New York State's a big winery state. It's a $5 billion industry in New York State. Well, they've got all this winemaking equipment and wineries. If the grapes all get eaten,
Oh.
they can come to buy our maple syrup. We'll raise the price. But I think there is some opportunity there to make maple wine. So, just to kind of walk through some of the beverage products that we're working on. One that we're trying to release soon is a small sales sap bottling guideline, right? Just drinkable sap. I love drinking sap. I don't know about you all, but I put a bucket on the tree outside of the sugar house so I can fill my water bottle during the sugaring season. It's refreshing. It's right there. It's slightly sweet, and a lot of people enjoy it. But there are some challenges there, right? So this is it's on the market, right? It's out there. There's been some big companies that have tried this and have gone under. But I think, there's the advantage is, the opportunity is you get more value per unit. And I'll walk through that in just a second. Less energy, you don't have to boil it, right? It just flows to the sugar house and you have to process it less intensively. The challenges are shelf stability,
Exactly.
right? Processing equipment. Who has a bottling line in their sugar house, right? And regulatory compliance is also an issue, because we're outside of our mostly exempt pure maple products world, even though it is a pure maple product potentially. So there are companies like this, but if you go to this scale, you're talking about working with a co-packer, right? You're taking your sap to a big factory where they're packing it for you. And the challenge there is you go to a factory like that and you say, I want to produce 1,000 units of this, or 2,000 units. And they'll laugh and they'll say, well, our minimum run size is 100,000 units.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, never mind. I don't have $1 million to put down to start this. So what we're trying to come up with is a small scale option with the equipment you have in your sugar house already. Next slide, please. And here's the value proposition as I see it anyway, right? 43 gallons of sap, we could turn it into syrup. And if we have a good market, we could put it into 8 pints and get $120 gross for that 43 gallons of syrup. Or we could make 344 pints of sap, sell them for $3 each, and then that same amount of sap gets us, that's the gross, right? There's some other costs involved, but that's a lot more revenue coming out of that same amount of sap for less work potentially. This is kind of the dream scenario, right? Because there's processing costs involved. And it's a little harder to sell a large volume. You'd have to sell a large volume of drinks. But the market's there. And this is the potential as I see it. Next slide, please. So the challenges again, shelf stability is a challenge, right? What are some of the small scale options for filtering, pasteurizing, acidifying, or adding preservatives? That's the first thing that we looked at, to make a product that we can put on the shelf that doesn't have to be in the refrigerator, that isn't going to spoil in a week. Next slide. And then we had to look at the small scale processing equipment options. Filtration, right? What kind of a filtration equipment do you have in your sugar house? A lot of people have a filter press. That can work. This is a new option that works really well. Has anyone heard of ultrafiltration? I talked about it yesterday.
Right.
So the Maple equipment dealers, a lot of them are selling ultrafiltration units now. It's a whole separate unit. It looks like a reverse osmosis machine. It operates like a reverse osmosis machine. It's just the membrane that it has inside lets the sugars and minerals through the membrane with the permeate, but it rejects all the bacteria and yeast. So it's a way to basically not quite sanitize your sap, but pretty much remove all that junk. So you can take really cloudy sap, the worst sap you've ever seen, run it through that machine and it looks like water. Now the catch there is that people don't want to buy a new unit, right? You don't want to go out and buy a whole new rig that you have to put in your sugar house. Well, you can just put the membrane in a reverse osmosis unit and it works the same way. You just keep your permeate, throw the concentrate back into the tank and keep cycling it through until it's all filtered. So you don't really need a whole new rig. You can get one if you want, but if you want to just buy a membrane to filter sap to sell as a beverage, all you need is a reverse osmosis unit and a different type of membrane. And you can accomplish the same thing. So ultrafiltration is a great option for this. For pasteurization, we've got lots of different things that warm up sap in the sugar house, right? So that's not a big challenge. And then for filling bottles, there are a lot of bottling units out there. They're really expensive, but we've all got bottling units, or most of us do, right? We have a way that we're hot packing already, our syrup, so we can use that equipment. Next slide. So the process we came up with to make shelf-stable, drinkable sap, small scale, the best option we came up with was for shelf stability was actually acidifying it a little bit. Then get it below the botulism danger point. So we tried a bunch of different acids, food grade acids, because we wanted something that preserved that sap flavor. We didn't want something that interfered a lot. And just a little bit of malic acid seemed to do the trick. Malic acid, that's the sour apple type flavor. Malic, coming from like the scientific name for apples is malus. It's the malus genus. So malic acid, it's kind of like an apple acid. But at small quantities, it really blends really well with the sap flavor. It doesn't really transform it in a really noticeable way. So we acidify it to 4.2 pH, which takes us out of the danger zone for pathogens. Pasteurize it at 185 degrees for 9 minutes. Hot pack the bottles, invert them, make sure that the caps are pasteurized. So pretty much the same process as maple syrup. And then cool and label, pretty simple. The only difference here is that you would have to do this in a licensed kitchen. Yes, Ms.
Are you bringing the sap to a certain sugar content? Because every day your sap content is different, so your recipe are you standardizing it by doing it already?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question was, what's the sugar content in the sap and how do you standardize that? And that's a great question because if you worked with acids at all, mixing them in foods, some foods buffer the acid a little bit, so they neutralize it essentially. And so that's one of the fine-tuning things that we're putting in the notebook, because one of the things we wanted to do was concentrate our sap, acidify it, and then put it in drums, so we could come back later and dilute it and fill bottles. But we found that if we went above 10% sugar, that it buffers the acid too much, and we couldn't preserve it in drums. So yeah, some of that guidance will be in the notebook. And another thing we're waiting on to finish the notebook, we're almost done with the project, is creating a carbonation protocol. Because sap tastes a lot better, at least in my mind, if you carbonate it a little bit. It works as a still beverage, but carbonated sells better, typically. So that will be in the notebook as well, and some options for adding some light flavorings. Next slide, please. And then lastly, we're going to make sure that all the regulatory compliance issues are well explained in that notebook. We already have all this information, but that will be in there in really clear terms in the notebook, because regulatory compliance is always really important if you don't want your products seized or make anyone sick. Next slide, please. Right. So water's all good and fine, it's healthy and everything, but some people like the hard stuff, right? That's a reliable good seller is alcohol. So there's been a lot of interest in making distilled spirits with maple. It's not really novel, but we felt like it was important to get out there and create some good guidance for a distilled spirit that is a maple distilled spirit that's actually just made with maple. So we set out to do that, and what we came up with was what we're calling Maplo. If you're familiar with distilled spirits at all, there's a traditional French apple brandy called Pommeau. So it's an apple brandy. It has a very specific process. So we basically mimicked the Palmo process to create a distilled spirit from maple. And I'll show you that process now. Next slide, please. Right. So first thing we did is we took buddy maple syrup, so processing grade syrup, and we made a wine with it. We fermented it. Right. And we've done a lot of fermenting with maple before, so this wasn't where we learned anything new. But if you haven't fermented maple before, maple doesn't have all the nutrients that yeasts really like, and you need to keep your yeasts happy when they do a fermentation or they create off flavors. That's where bad beer and wine comes from, is unhappy yeast. They create byproducts when they're stressed that are not so pleasant to taste. So syrup is the carbohydrate source, but for their nutrients, Fermade O is a really good formulation of nutrients, and it's something that's commercially available in brewing supply companies. So it has just the right blend of nutrients, nitrogen and things like that. A lot of people use DAP, which is a really kind of like a junk food nitrogen source, a nutrient source for yeast. You really want a high quality nutrient source for your yeast. Good yeast, so we have some guidance on that. We did a lot of yeast trials with maple syrup to see which ones liked fermenting maple the most and which ones preserve flavor the best. So we have some yeast recommendations there. There's a huge amount of different yeasts out there. If you've ever looked at any of this stuff, it's amazing. People have been fooling around with making things alcoholic since the beginning of time, right? So there's a lot of options there. And then fermentation conditions, temperature, time. So we're doing kind of a warm but not heated fermentation at a slow rate, 14 days. We get a decent quality wine from that. And then we're running it through a still, right? We're using a pot still. So basically cooking the wine to dissolve or evaporate the alcohol, and it goes up a column with some plates in it, and we're basically condensing out the vapors of alcohol at different temperatures. And those are called different cuts, different levels of evaporation. So you're getting different types of alcohol mixtures. Next slide, please. This is the still we've been using. This is one of the pieces of equipment we can use up at that big food lab in Geneva, New York that I was telling you about at the Cornell Food Venture Center. So this is a fairly nice pot still. This is the part where we're heating up the maple wine, and it evaporates. It goes through this column, and we separate it out into a bunch of different cuts here. So this is the alcohol that we've condensed out at different temperatures. So it's got different compositions. Next slide. So these are our cuts, as I said. And if in the distilling world, the stuff that comes off first at the lowest temperature is called the heads of the distillation. And that's where the dangerous stuff comes out too, right? The methanes and things like that, things that'll make you go blind. So usually most of this is thrown away. Lots of undesirable flavors there. The middle of the distillation is the hearts. That's the part you keep. This is where we got our clean spirit that came out. And then the tails has some of the heavier compounds that have a higher boiling point. Now, one of the keys of dialing in a really good distilled spirit is knowing how much of this stuff to blend back into the hearts to give it a little flavor complexity. Because if you distill something well, you can get just a clean spirit. It doesn't taste like anything. It just has an alcohol burn. It's like a really 10-time distilled vodka, right? It would be a neutral spirit. And we might want to add some complexity. In our formula, we just discarded these because we're just coming up with a basic formula. But if you're working with a distiller, they might want to experiment with adding some of this stuff back in to create a more complex final product. Next slide. So anyway, we took that clean spirit once we identified which cuts we wanted to use, and then we blended some good quality maple syrup back into it. And then we have options to either serve it that way or to age it in a new whiskey barrel. And when you age it in a new whiskey barrel, it just gives it some really nice qualities. It's a really nice distilled spirit to serve as like a digestif or an aperitif before or after a meal with some of the pairings we've identified, or nuts and ripened cheeses, things like that. Goes really well with these. So we did a product launch with this at Cornell Agritech. A lot of big distilleries from New York came, and there's a lot of interest in making products like this. So it's out there. We have the fact sheet with all the instructions for how to make this. So as a maple producer, if you have a craft distillery in your area and you want to create a partnership, you can take that fact sheet that has all the instructions for making this to the distiller. And they don't have to do any of the guesswork. You can say, this is a product that's shown to be really popular. We know how to make it. Would you be interested in a partnership? And it might be something you can do. Yeah. So lots of potential there. So, and feel free to ask questions at any time, folks, just so you know. I know I'm rattling through a bunch of stuff really quickly. So another area that I think is really interesting is the sports drinks, right? People are always looking for these beverages that give them miraculous levels of energy or whatever, or keep them awake. Red Bull, there's all kinds of stuff out there. But the simplest one that has a proven market space, I think, is the sports drinks. Because maple just goes really well with this, right? We've got electrolytes already in our syrup. Carbohydrates, minerals, lots of flavor. So it pairs really well. So we came up with some sports drink formulations in shelf-stable form. And we've tested these out pretty extensively using our captive audience, the Cornell track team. Right, so we had a nice little partnership with them. So we did a lot of different versions of our sports drink. And the Cornell Athletics Department very kindly let us set up shop right outside of their headquarters there. So when they're trickling in from their daily run, all sweaty and thirsty, it seemed like a great time to test this out. And they really liked it. We had really good results from that. 70% liked our tart cherry formulation. 88% liked our tangerine maple sports drink. And these are poor college students, mind you. Well, some of them aren't so poor. It's Cornell. But they're willing to pay at a price point that was profitable. So I think there's a lot of potential there too. We put all of our market analysis in our fact sheet, so you can see exactly what people liked, what they didn't like, what they'd be willing to pay for the different formulations. So all that information is there. Slide in. Here's our cost analysis. We're looking at 70 cents to produce 24 ounces, and if people are willing to pay, $2 to $4, that's a pretty good proposition right there. Pretty good value proposition. Kombucha? Any kombucha drinkers in the audience? No? All right, got one. So kombucha, if you're not familiar with it, it's fermented tea. It's been around for a long time, but it's had a resurgence in the U.S. recently. A lot of interest in this. If you come to Ithaca, if you stab someone in Ithaca, they wouldn't believe that just kombucha would come for you. That's all they drink. You go to the grocery store and you can buy it by the gallon. I think there's a lot up here in Vermont too, in some places. But it's really popular. It's become a mainstream beverage now. So we've had this guidance up on our website for a long time now. We have a 46-page guide to making kombucha with maple syrup. It's a little different. Kombucha is basically, it's an acid. It's almost like drinking vinegar, but the way you make it is you make a sweetened tea and you put into it what's called a SCOBY, a symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast. It looks like a little slimy hockey puck. You buy them online. You can buy them on Amazon. It comes in a little bag of water. And you put it in the tea and close it off, and it first ferments it into an alcohol, and then it converts the alcohol into different acids. Acetic acid among them, but there's other acids as well. So it's a slightly acidic drink, and then most people carbonate it. So it's a fizzy, kind of bright, invigorating beverage. A lot of different flavor options. I really like ginger kombucha, but you can make like a lemon and thyme, cranberry, blueberry. There's all different flavors. Some people are even putting algae into it, like green, like spirulina algae. People buy it, and they like it. So it's really popular. We found that the SCOBY needs a couple of generations or a couple of runs through the kombucha before it adapts to maple. And that's kind of the key. You have to make a couple batches before it starts making good maple kombucha. But it's all there in great detail on our website. This is some work that we did long ago, but we've got fact sheets online too for sodas. Sodas I don't emphasize a lot because the soda market's been kind of going down and down and down. People drink less and less soda. But one area where people seem to drink that's kind of hanging in there, or maybe even growing, is this craft soda market, right? The homemade sodas. People will still buy that. I think they somehow perceive it to be a little more wholesome, right? And it is more wholesome if we're making it with maple syrup instead of high fructose corn syrup. So we've got this guidance out there. The most popular flavor by far has been the lemon maple ginger. It's just a really nice flavor combination. These bottles are examples from Roxbury Mountain Maple out in the Catskills of New York. And last time I checked in with them, they had sold quite a few of these. They go to New York City selling these for $4 a bottle, somewhere around 40,000 units, something like that. Last time I talked to them, that's a pretty nice little market. But there's some instructions there for acidifying and adding some preservatives to make this shelf stable like other sodas are. Next slide. Wine, we've done a lot of work with wine. We're still working on improving wine. Winemaking is an art. The basics are pretty simple. You dilute some maple syrup, you put some yeast in it, you ferment it, that's maple wine, ta-da, right? But it's kind of simplistic. If you did that, you'd have kind of like a syrupy, cloying flavor that not a lot of people like. So there's some things you need to add to it. There's some ways you can adjust the fermentation to make it a little more sophisticated. And then the thing we're working on now is a secondary fermentation, adding some malic acid, doing what's called a malolactic fermentation. That adds kind of those buttery flavors to it. It's kind of a buttery maple wine with some more sophistication. That starts to sound more appealing to customers. They're willing to pay more for it. So all that information's on our website too. And we're doing a lot of work with beer. We have a beer making guide in our book. Beer is similar. It's really easy to make beer. It's hard to make good beer. And I've seen a lot of what I consider, this is my opinion, other people might like it, some bad beers that are being commercially made that are just, they're overpowering maple. They're trying to sell it as like pancakes and all that type of flavor. It's too much maple right in the front. We're trying to make more subtle, sophisticated beers with maple. Amber ales, Belgian ales, things like that maple flavor really is more compatible with. So all that's on our website as well. If you're interested in brewing, brewing's fun to do at home. It's not that hard. If you haven't done it before, you can buy a kit online for a few $100. You can make all the beer you could ever want. One run of beer through a 5-gallon carboy. I mean, it depends on how much you drink. For me, that would last me a lifetime. So it's fun, it's easy, it's something you can share with your friends if they're into brewing. Say, hey, try it with maple. It turns out pretty interesting. Next slide. So lots of information there in summary. On our website especially, lots of resources there. CornellMaple.com. Definitely check out the confections notebook if you're interested. There's a lot of good resources in there. Definitely reach out to Dr. Belisle if you have questions. She's happy to answer your questions. Every time she gets a question through the email, she's so excited. For me, it's like, oh, one more thing in my inbox. How am I going to get to that? So definitely reach out to her. She's a great resource. Next slide. And something else that's interesting is that we're actually putting on we used to do maple camp every year. We still do some years. We started it a long time ago. There are lots of imitation maple camps now, but Cornell's the original. And the idea behind Maple Camp is we had people come out to one of our research facilities and spend a week learning everything you need to know, soup to nuts, about making and selling maple syrup. We still do that sometimes, but we're finding that there are higher level needs now. So we're having our first ever Maple Products Retreat. We're going to do it in Geneva, New York, up on the lake. And it's going to be a much more advanced maple camp with our partners at the Cornell Food Venture Center and the Cornell Center of Excellence for Food and Agriculture. So these are commercial scale type resources, right? If you want to work with a food establishment, it's going to be 3 days long in early September in Geneva, New York. We're about to put the registration on our website. If you're interested, check there soon, or you can just contact me directly and I'll tell you all about it. It's going to be pretty interesting. And I think it'll be fun too, because we're going to do some fun things as well. We'll go to a winery for dinner and some things like that. You got to have fun with these things, right?
Oh.
That's the whole point. Next slide, please. And I have to thank our partners. We get a lot of support these days for all this types of research. USDA, of course, is a huge partner to us at New York Ag and Markets, College of Ag and Life Sciences at Cornell, but we have a lot of businesses that are willing to work with us and also our really reliable, wonderful partners at the New York Maple Producers Association. So with that, I'll open the floor to questions. Oh, one last thing I should mention. Is anyone here from Vermont? A couple of Vermonters? Okay, so you have a Food Venture Center in Vermont if you're They've got some interesting resources there. They gave me a nice tour. They're working with maple producers already, and they're doing a lot of nut butter work. So if you're interested in making a maple nut butter, they already kind of know the gig. So check that out. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, do you collaborate or check in with Jesse based and what he's up to?
Yes and no. I mean, we know Jesse really well, and I know he's been working on some distillation work. We haven't collaborated with that work, which is interesting because we've been doing maple distillations for a couple decades now.
I think, well, he presented yesterday, and they're trying to do in their distillery is getting the yeast source from maple.
Right, a wild yeast.
Yeah, so that way it can be labeled a pure maple product and all that too, because they won't be adding an outside yeast.
I think that'll be interesting, especially if we're successful. Usually wild yeast aren't tolerant to high alcohol levels. The yeast that are tolerant have been bred over many generations. Your typical wild yeast is tolerant to like 3 to 5% alcohol. So you can start a fermentation that way. If they're successful, that'd be pretty
Yeah,
cool.
so you guys are doing great. Thanks.
We should work with Jesse more.
Well, now that he seems to have, he's got a lot of hops going his way.
Yes.
But yeah, he doesn't need to repeat anything you've already done, but he's got funding to continue where you guys probably have gotten to at this point. But yeah.
Yeah, we love collaborating on state lines. I know there's a little bit of the Vermont versus New York, we have to sort of all that stuff, but those are imaginary lines on that.
Well, he's Michigan.
Yeah, in Michigan.
Michigan.
But we're, all of us in the maple research world benefit from collaboration.
No, great.
We'll probably work with that. Any other questions, thoughts, any more feedback on the hazelnut spread?
When do you think that'll be done?
The fact sheet?
Yeah.
Within a few weeks.
Okay.
We just
You're
got
that
sidetracked
close.
working on grant writing at that time of year.
Oh,
The
yes.
Cornell Maple program is 100% grant funded. Cornell does not provide our funding. They support us, we have facilities there, we have a lot of great resources. So grant writing time of year is busy for us. That's how we make sure we have our lunch money. And jobs. Any other questions, final questions? All right, well, if you want to find me, next slide, last slide. You can always find me at my email, at our website, and if you're interested, we've got a podcast, Sweet Talk All Things Maple, that includes some talks about value-added products, but a whole bunch of other things. We try to keep it interesting. We joke around a little bit, but we end up having some really good interviews with some of the top experts in the world, so that's been a really great resource for us. And it's fun to listen to if you're out untapping trees or wire tying mainline or whatever. Pull up Sweet Talk. We'll try to keep you entertained.
Is your next episode with Catherine?
Yeah, our next episode we're going to push out about next week will be with Dr. Belial, and it will be all about how to set up a commercial kitchen and get it licensed.
Oh.
So that could be useful. All right, well, thank you, folks. If you want a sample, another sample, feel free to circulate up here. Give it a try. Well, thank you.
You've got a real gem with Catherine there. She presented here last year.
Yes.
And she was very, very good.
Yeah, Catherine's been